until the motion happens, you're not, basically.
Okay. So we will
I did prepare.
bring this meeting of the JMRL Policy Committee, Village Policy Committee to order. And we'll start with a motion for a remote participation. And I'll just go ahead with it. I move that Martha Ledford's request to attend today's meeting of the JMRL board remotely due to a personal matter be approved. All in favor, aye. And welcome, Martha. Okay. All right. So we are, as you all know, have kind of finished a cycle of a number of sort of various policies, and we're starting fresh with with kind of a fundamental policy for the organization, which is our materials selection policy. This is our regular 10-year review for this. It's sort of my opinion that the bases are covered and that there's not drastic overhaul that's needed. At the same time, because it's a fundamental policy, I always feel like we want to do our due diligence with just examining from scratch, everything that should be in a policy, and comparing that with what we have and making tweaks. And we always also have been over time just updating the tone, thinking carefully about the tone of our policies, and so there will be an opportunity to do that with some rewording and so forth as well. So that's just some context of what I think the right approach to take is. And an example would be the library mission and values. A couple of years ago, everybody was like, okay, that sounds good. But when we actually looked at it and said, well, what could it be if we started from scratch? I think we ended up with a much stronger product that's, shapes everything we do. Okay, having said that, I think we've also had a sort of a workflow that we've sort of developed over the last couple of years as a committee, where we just kind of bullet point out, here's the things that need to get covered. And that's sort of the phase one, without worrying too much about wording or wordsmithing. And then there's, iteration further on meetings where we start to wordsmith. So that's one approach we could take. Another approach we could take is just start reading through this word by word and making tweaks. That's less in line with sort of the greenfield or start from scratch approach. But I'm open to thoughts on how to proceed.
Mike, can we also mention that we're being joined today by Meredith Dickens?
Oh, thank you.
Selection manager, who I'm pretty sure had a hand in the crafting of this policy. Knows this before your time?
I was around for the minor update. I can't remember exactly what was minorly updated, but I was not in this position in 2015.
Okay, so this is not your language. The 2019 minor update was the updating the policy numbers and the information about requests are in consideration.
I misspoke. I was in the position, but I wasn't. It was just presented to me.
Okay. You didn't write this.
Local voices would be the most recent.
I think that was
added.
It actually was the
Oh,
mention
okay.
of local voices. Thank you.
And then also we've got two resources that we have used. Well, one resource, and then you just sent along a kind of an AI summary of that resource. So we do have from the state library a collection of collection development policies that they have gotten statewide. It's not complete. And there are about, I think, 95 libraries in the state, and it's probably less than half of them, but I thought it was a pretty good starting point.
So what I did with the summary, and I realized, I think David at least skimmed it, but I'm sure no one else had time to look at it, but I fed it all 30 that the state had provided us and just said, can you do what I wish I had gotten around to doing, which is read all these and pull out the common themes. And again, that's sort of from this bullet point standpoint. So I don't know if it's worth putting that.
Yeah, I thought it was useful actually, because it did identify some of the things that we might, if we do decide to bullet point out things, it pretty much said, here's what everybody else has.
Right. So, and then, so you'll scroll up, because that was sort of the first right here. So here's what this includes. It includes sort of, I asked it to look at the top themes and just bullet point them out. And so we'll look at those. I asked it to look something to look at, spit out its own sample policy, and then what's different with what we have, with what JMRL specifically has versus that sample. The only thing I'll say in terms of context of this is it's just an average of what you feed it. So I fed it the 30 and you get an average back. I will say that our policy is 10 years old and the average age of the ones it's looking at is, probably similar. So if there are new, issues or topics in the world of professional librarianism, that those aren't going to show up here in this average. It's just an average of what the state has already had, but it's a good starting point, as you said. So, what part do you want to look at first?
Well, actually, the part that I thought was most interesting was the last part, the last 10, basically, like, here are the things that were different.
Yeah.
And they were all very kind of JMRL specific, like Local Voices collection is not in every other library or whatnot. So just in terms of my brief running through it, I think that this basically confirmed to me that what JMRL has been using is in line with what other libraries have been using, to your point that, things might be changing or have changed in the past few years. But, there weren't any differences there saying like, oh, JMRL is not following good practices.
Right. Yeah, that's a great.
I mean, I looked at probably 7 or 8 specifically. I didn't look at all of them. I didn't think it was necessary, but I really did try to look at ones that were regional libraries. And it's very consistent with those. There's the placement of things that are different.
Yeah.
There's some detail and some that we don't have that I don't think is necessary. But I was,
I did the same. I looked at the larger libraries and the regional library. The big one, I think, was Central Rappahannock, and
Yeah.
kind of compared what they had to what we have. So I also left. I've always thought that this was a pretty good policy on our part. So I left feeling like it's at least comparable to what's out in the state.
Back just to the differences that you just pointed out, the broad takeaway I had from that is we might have some more specific details that maybe aren't really necessary. I mean, so that's the place to start, is what's the scope of this policy? And as we end up going line by line at some point, is this little section about non-library sources, is that applicable in the scope of in what we want to have in terms of broad criteria, or is it something that should be moved somewhere else, possibly just to the operation or procedures? So that's another thing to keep in mind. Do we need everything that's here?
I would think in terms of bullet pointing, it would be hard for me to start fresh without just including
Yeah.
what's already there.
Yeah.
I feel like it is. Maybe it would be better to say like what's not there that I think should be there, because otherwise I think that the core elements are there. Yeah.
well, I have a question then. I'll start. I mean, one thing that I wondered about, I mean, I know this is the case, but it wasn't clear in ours, is because it's written in 14, is our material selection is the same for books as it is for other formats. Is that correct?
The criteria are written so that they can be applied to multiple formats.
Where does it say that?
It's just the
And the criteria.
the criteria for evaluating. You can use those for whether it's a movie or an audiobook or a regular book.
And to me, that
Then we
flows.
don't need to spell that out. I mean, it's formats would include whatever,
Format is
and
one
it's
of
gonna
them.
change.
Yeah.
So-
Right, we had that in the first sentence of the whole page, and I thought too, it occurred to me that maybe digital it's printed and recorded word into visual image. So that's what it covers in the first line there.
Yeah.
Do we need to add digital?
Well,
Digital is print.
Yeah.
Or recording, potentially.
I guess to me, just the fact that we use the word materials, and then internally, I know that when we say material, we're very intentionally use that word instead of books,
Yeah,
because you want to use other stuff. But maybe a definition of what material means. I'm always sensitive to library jargon, that all the library folks know what it means, but the rest of the world may or may not. It may have different meanings to others.
Except it's gonna change. You know,
Yeah,
through
so we want
Yeah.
something broad enough
Right.
that it'll encompass the
Right.
right.
Thing.
3D, whatever it is.
Technology.
Yeah.
The next
Yeah.
level, we
Yeah.
don't know who's out there.
I think that's a good note, maybe, a comment is just broadly define materials. And at that point, then when we use materials consistently, it just,
Yeah,
It's known to-
some one of these talks about platforms. And what is that what that means? Platform, different.
It's not a word that I personally think of when I think about library materials,
Yeah.
but maybe it would work.
One of, I'm sorry, one of the sample.
One of the other jurisdiction.
So platform would be like.
Yeah.
Right, so I think when we're evaluating how to serve up digital materials, but that would be
But
also
Libby-
more of a software concern, like it's also, cause it. How we evaluate.
Right.
Yeah,
Same.
Oh, right, like if we're
Software
choosing to
platforms.
buy this platform, it's not always about entirely just like what materials they're offering. It also depends on
Accessibility.
accessibility, budget, all sorts of other things that
Yeah,
like if we're trying to decide what kind of,
to me, the platform would flow downstream from this.
But that,
We have criteria for what materials we want to have. When we're looking at platforms, that's top of mind, is the platform offer, materials that are in line with our.
I think Martha wants to chime in. Go ahead, Martha. I think you might still be muted, though. And frozen. Nope, that's frustrating. Martha, from our end, you're not moving and we can't hear you. There you go. Now you're moving. Yeah, we still can't hear you. Wanted to see this platform. Keep trying and we'll hear you when you buzz in.
I guess the most important thing was just that when you select things, whether they're books or whether they go and are online resource platform, whatever that may be, it's the same, you use the same criteria.
yes, yeah, these criteria are, whether it's a print book or an ebook, we sometimes have the same books.
So it seems to me that maybe we could come up with some language to make that super clear.
Since most people, I mean, more and more people are getting their materials online.
Right, right. And sometimes these criteria help us get a book in a certain format if it is for more accessibility or there's greater availability in one format versus the other.
Okay, so that would be right up front. If we think about the intro as being like, what do we want to make sure the public knows about what the library is doing here? That seems like the appropriate place to.
And I mean, I mentioned this to you, David, a lot of the ones that I looked at right up in front in their philosophy or their statement, refer to the American Library Association guidelines, the Bill of Rights, what are their access to library resources for minors, the freedom to read statement, the Library Bill of Rights.
Yeah, and so that is referenced in the policy under the request for reconsideration section.
But it's applicable for other.
A lot of libraries like kind of put that front and center.
I feel like we have that sort of endorsement in our values perhaps, or it's more of an upfront, it's earlier in the manual as a whole. I mean,
Our code of ethics certainly points back to the code of ethics. I don't think our mission or values mention.
yeah, don't know if it's the bylaws, we should look for that, but I think very early in sort of intro to the policy manual, it says we endorse the freedom to read principles.
In the preamble to the policy manual website, it
There you go.
says, policies may be amended. In addition to the policies published in this manual, the Board of Trustees also supports the American Library Association Library Bill of Rights and ALA accepted interpretations and the freedom to read statement and its policy recommendations, free access to libraries for minors, and the freedom to view statement.
So that's at the beginning of the policy.
That's on out here. I can.
Is that,
And that- I mean, I
But-
think that.
but I think that,
Yeah.
I think that's in a policy also. I don't, so when you show, we'll see if you're talking about,
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Policy statement.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, there
What's
it is.
that?
Yeah.
So nothing after this is going to go against that.
Yeah.
Right, and it's included in this, in the current policy as well. But I think here it's placed as just a conversation about reconsideration, not a conversation about selection.
Yeah.
And the other policies that you looked at, they cited these as it's gonna help us to, it's gonna help us to guide selection decisions.
Yeah.
So I could see moving that portion up. Yeah.
Even though it's.
Yes, to me, the question is, do we want to repeat that at somewhere in this policy?
Or move it to the beginning, under philosophy.
Or just know that it's already somewhere else, but,
Yeah.
but it.
Martha asks if we have a glossary, and perhaps we could create a glossary so we don't continually have to define library jargon.
It's a pretty good idea.
Answer, Martha, is no, we don't have one. But maybe that's something we need to think about.
I like it, yeah.
I guess one thing that I think has changed in the last 10 years here, and it has to do with these platforms, is that the library now is offering things where we are not the sole decider on what the content is. We are, for some examples, we offer our patrons access to the Canopy streaming video service platform. You can use your library card to watch a movie at home or whatnot, and we're not making selection decisions about what's available in that platform. So somewhere in here, I think we need to address, like, not go line by line, but saying that, you know, there are materials offered.
Third parties or
It-
however you.
Yeah. The library doesn't have decision-making power over. So if somebody were to say to us, you know, I want you to get that movie on Canopy, the library could not do that, could not add it
Or take it off.
Yeah.
And we can either offer the service or don't offer the service. So I think we should probably address that.
I think. And I think that comes into maybe a statement about evaluating the platforms which offer these wholesale collections. We're evaluating their collection criteria when they're creating their offerings. And because, for instance, we chose
Technology.
Canopy versus a
Oh.
different, because of their offerings as a whole, in general,
Does that fall under technology? Not material.
I mean, the decisions that we're making about adding these things that are offering content are
Yeah.
largely falling under Meredith's purview as being like, let's make it, and
And patron requests.
patron requests too, but also, you know, they have to work within our framework, you know, we have to be able to host things, we have to be able to offer things. We have to
It's-
be able to afford things.
it's related also to how we choose to contract databases. So,
Yes.
in the reference department as well, evaluates the databases that we license, which have a collection of materials for access, and we don't have individual publications in those databases. So it's not, I mean, when you think about it, it's not a new concept. It's just more.
And I can't think of a
Popular
place that
materials.
has been addressed by the policy.
Other than it's, yeah, access to material.
So this, I think, is a bullet point or two, or maybe even a section here. And it would be databases, or you could stretch it out to the Overdrive Consortium, which we're a part of. So we're buying materials for JMRL patrons on Libby for them to read or listen to, but we're also a member of a consortium, and our patrons have access to materials that are available at other libraries throughout Virginia. But we don't have total control over those things that are being purchased.
So I think this is worth bullet pointing somewhere or touching on.
Defining what.
Right at the bottom.
what's the-
Yeah.
And it's definitely something that's changed in the last 10
Yeah,
years.
and
We
it
wouldn't
will
have addressed
continue
it
to
10 years
change.
ago.
Yeah, yeah.
But my thought, just listening to this, is still that it flows back from, we choose various materials for various reasons. I can imagine various digital platforms in the world that we just don't participate with because they don't fit this. So I still feel like these flow backwards from, or flow downstream from our criteria, and we're just trying to choose. I think what I'm hearing is, well, we just try and identify, is there a broad match between this offering and what we're broadly trying to provide? And if so, then it makes sense. So that's the level where I would maybe think about it. Yeah, I think something along those lines will cover it. And also leave, it seems like we need a little bit of wiggle room where if there's a few, some stuff that doesn't match our criteria or is missing that we would otherwise provide. It doesn't have to be 100%. It's not possible for it to be 100%.
The reality of the digital marketplace is that you can only get close enough.
Yeah. So if we kind of, as a governing body, feel like, hey, close enough is good enough, then that's kind of what we want to convey.
Is there something currently in here, format, cost, and availability?
Yeah, and also ease of use. That's the same as format, like accessibility would fall under readability and ease of use. We might want to use accessibility instead, or in addition.
Where is that something that already exists here? Or
Right
something
above
that's-
where you are.
It says ease of use. You could readability, clarity,
Yeah, so that,
accessibility, and or ease of use. Accessibility could mean something different than ease of use.
Yeah.
And I know also that, we have patrons that are very interested in other products that JMRL doesn't offer because they're cost prohibitive.
and so that would be format, cost, and availability.
Yeah. And whether or not we need to spell that out for people, or if this is enough just to say that, hey, that's cost prohibitive.
Meredith or David, do you have a feel for, I know neither of you wrote this, but where these bullets came from? Do they mirror closely, a sample from ALA?
I would say, looking at them, they are similar to a bunch of the bullets that you would find in sample documents or other library. So it was probably a similar exercise with what we did, was looking at.
Yeah.
But they're just standard professional criteria for evaluation.
I'm just checking the ALA listed ones to see. I don't see those specifically there. I mean, this is the type of thing that, right, I learned at one point in libraries.
We do have professional books that have sample documents that would list.
A word like accessibility would be a good addition, because that didn't come up necessarily.
Yeah.
10 years ago.
Somebody, oh, look at this. Geographical region.
Well, it's just the way the sentence reads, I think is a little confusing. That's
Library
my
acknowledges the purpose.
minor
of
input.
libraries in the Jefferson Madison regional
Libraries.
Oh, just like the region.
Yeah.
And a service area.
Service area. Yeah, that whole statement there, like,
Yeah.
not unnecessarily duplicate functions and materials.
With
This
that,
comes up partly because we have the university library.
Yeah.
very
That's
close
what I thought it had to do with.
And we do get requests for academic material that is better served through an academic library.
And we're not connected to their.
We do interlibrary loan.
It's a library loan.
And they have access to our catalog data. Their catalog system shows materials that are at.
Okay.
And it's a tiny subset of what they're offering.
Yeah.
So do we just want to say that then?
I wouldn't say that it's not just the university library. There are other special interest libraries like church libraries and school libraries that have their own focus. Yeah.
EVCC.
So UVA is the best, clearest example, but I think in general, we're basically saying, this is what we do, and other libraries have their own objectives.
We don't have textbooks, we don't have expensive art books.
Textbooks is, yeah.
It's not expensive. Not like,
Having said that, there might be a clearer way to phrase whatever, we had to ask our specialists what it even meant.
It looks like we're kind of going down line by line. So
Yeah.
should we go back to the top and start there? So what we have so far is we want to, in the kind of intro there, we want to broadly define materials and make it clear that this is applying to all of our circulating materials. Maybe consider bringing some of those outside resources up, showcasing. And then we get into this philosophy.
I think if we added the outside resources that they would land in this philosophy. We could consider reviewing the values and see if there's any pieces from that that should be invoked here or copied or duplicated. I think there are probably some pieces there that parallel or complement. That whole second one is essentially the philosophy.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
One possibility is as stated in our values, comma, and then, cut, paste, summarize some pieces, some parts of that.
Could this be a one-for-one
Could be.
swap? Is there something here that we don't want to lose?
I mean, those last two sentences, I think, are very explicitly say something that the value doesn't say. It's
Yeah.
why do we have this policy? Guiding the librarians and informing the public.
That could be more in the above that.
you can just replace the first
The
sentence
first
with that
sentence,
with.
yeah.
Martha
We
suggests
invoke the old
linking.
mission statement, but
Martha suggests linking directly. I like that.
instead of just the mission, but just say mission.
and values, yeah, to support the mission and values of the JAM.
And maybe just link from there.
I do like the wording of the
Yeah, the
value.
wording is really good as a value. I think I like it as well.
Well, put a pin in it where this is today. I don't necessarily want to wordsmith every part, but to me, but what I want, one thing I'd like to get from today is just a better feel for what the overall flow might look like. So to me, the preamble, I'll call it, the untitled preamble, talks about the scope of what this policy is supposed to accomplish. And that might be where you put, hey, it's part of what it's meant to, part of its purpose is to guide librarians, which is which is now in philosophy. Then the philosophy is sort of these broader statement of principles, which would either duplicate or copy or link to or broadly mirror that value that we all like. And then you pretty much jump into, you know, the core is these criteria. I don't know if that, this number one is very, it's like it's a disclaimer in some sense. I don't know if that needs to be at the, it needs to be there. I don't know if. The first thing that we talk about the criteria.
We're talking about tone.
Yeah.
Defensive from the beginning.
Yeah. So maybe David should make a note, maybe consider moving this.
It would make sense if the section on guidelines for selection starts with the criteria are, and then everything else follows.
I agree. Like starting with
Yeah,
this.
that would be number one.
Yeah, I would do that. Pull that up.
And then maybe some tonal things in that paragraph.
That could fit kind of between 4 and 5 down below, possibly, if you wanted to move it down.
It would make sense next to number 5, which talks about labeling for approval or.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're saying under guidelines, start with the criteria for selection.
I like that.
So Meredith, in terms of day-to-day, are there any tweaks to criteria that you would, you know, put on the table?
I actually wouldn't, I'd say the last couple weeks, I've used each one of these points.
Yeah.
To make a collection decision, so I wouldn't want to lose any of them.
Flip side, is there anything missing? Is there something?
Right, and I'm trying to think of a collection decision that I didn't have guidance for based on one of these things. Nothing comes to mind currently. You can fit a lot into what's written here. Yeah.
Okay.
There was one jurisdiction I looked at, and it listed the reviewers and trade publications. But that would be a mistake to do that, because that would change, that must change.
Yeah.
So I like what we
Yes,
have
ma'am.
here, just.
I think that would be more in a procedural document to help staff know where to look.
Yeah.
But listing specific publications
Yeah.
would be too limiting.
That's
And
interesting, but.
we're not assigned. The standard bibliographies sounds a little dated in to a modern librarian. It's technically true, we do have core collections that we can reference to say whether we need to include something. But I'm not sure if we would call them the standard bibliographies anymore. I don't know. I don't know what we would call it.
Would core collection mean more to the layperson than standard bibliography?
That's what I'm saying, if I can't.
I mean, I think core collection might be easier for people to understand than standard bibliography.
I think non-librarians would know.
Core collection is like a specific title of the book.
I would think
We use
something.
it as a catch-all term.
Yeah, I know what you mean. There's the book core collections, but then it's just like
Right.
things that would be expected to be in any public library type of thing.
Exactly, yeah.
There's a book called Core Collection.
It's not this way.
That's huge, and it's like, this
It's like,
is what
if
your
you're gonna
library.
build a library that most people agree, it would be these books.
Yeah.
So and that's updated periodically, I hope.
Yeah,
Yeah.
every couple of years. We just got the most recent edition.
Another option would be say, or inclusion in any public library of decent size.
Well, I like this concept that there's a generally, you know, acknowledged
Yeah, classics.
list.
Or could
It's
you
just what do you
say,
call that? I mean, if you said the word core collection, I would ask where. I just don't know what that means. But I like the concept.
Literally, standard bibliographies is true. It just, for some reason, it's not stated.
Well, it won't mean anything to members of the public reading it.
Exactly.
Right.
I can search around to see if there are any.
There's
alternative
probably
places.
something in one of the other,
Yeah,
I mean, could you say, or inclusion in a core collection of public library?
something like that, in like
Like,
publicly recognized
yeah,
core collection.
or professionally curated lists or something.
yeah.
And that's kind of already the evaluation reviewers and trade and professional
Yeah.
publications and critics and the popular press. I mean, do we even need this?
Well,
Is
one
that-
is talking about reviews and one is talking about this list of titles.
Right, which might be 100 years old, but they're still expected to be in the library.
You'll think
Or-
about-
Oh, yeah, I'll come up with that.
Public library.
It's taking it as a homework. But
I brought it up, so I might as well.
But I guess, that, Mike, what you were trying to suss out, is there any dead weight here? And then also, is there anything that we need that's not included?
right, so I think,
It sounds like not that we're aware of at this time.
right, we should consider those from two perspectives. One is just what other examples we can find. We've sort of done a little bit towards that. And then but since we have Meredith is the one who uses this day to day, I wanted to just make sure we got her experience brought into the conversation.
All right, I think we covered number 2 pretty well.
Mhm.
All righty, so number 3. Library acknowledges a particular interest in local and state issues. Okay, I mean, this to me is pretty procedural too. Maybe members of the public would want to know that. We get
I mean, we let
budgets-
them know we have
we
those
get budgets
documents.
every year, yeah.
And they come looking.
It's important.
To me, this is a guy, the governors are saying, hey, staff, we want to make sure you do this.
Yeah.
So if we want to, if that's important, then that's would be the reason to include it here. Yeah, I mean, do we do this and how do we provide these? But is it all just web links today or?
No, we
You
still
get
get
budget.
print copies of, well,
Because not everyone has.
particularly
web-
budget.
Yeah.
Yeah, so sometimes when you'll read a statement from, any one of our jurisdictions, it might say like, this information is available for viewing at, and it might be like, it might be a budget document, that's the most common one, but it might be a zoning.
The zoning.
Code.
Minutes from Board of Supervisors.
No, we don't keep those. We don't get them and don't keep them.
But if they are opening for public comment on, for instance, zoning issues, we might get.
The
information.
zoning rewrite in the city went through like 5 or 6 different versions that the library got print copies of just for people who were, and it was not designed that way. It was designed to be an online document. So it was kind of an unwieldy thing, but it was there for people who didn't want to read it online.
And do people check that out or they
They
just?
use
see
it in
the
Reference
library?
materials, you come and use it in the library.
People were, it was overwhelming. I mean, it was like this thick and small,
I mean, it reads like a government document, so,
Not particularly accessible.
not particularly.
well,
helpful. And people had strong feelings because that was not helping their personal interaction with the document. But yeah,
do we have retention guidelines for these?
that's a
And-
great question. I've had that question.
Yeah, do we need the city's budget from 10 years ago that's available online?
That's a good thing for me to look up.
Yeah. I will give you some homework.
My lean is to keep this in some form.
Okay. Yeah, that's a separate question really about
Yeah.
the retention. It doesn't need to be here, but
First year, yeah, last year, current year.
if the board says we're gonna retain local documents, we might have to tweak that a little bit to say within our, with-
Yeah.
Retention guidelines
yeah,
Or
as
capabilities.
long as they are with,
superseded.
As appropriate.
yeah, as
I
appropriate.
think
something
that
like
would be our retention guideline right now, so we'll see.
Okay, but leaning
That
towards.
could also
keeping-
be
Well, and also
spelled
thinking
out.
about-
Right.
I'm thinking about Charlottesville and Albemarle, but of course Nelson and Green and Louisa are their own. We don't get those central.
You don't get them at the
They
main
get them
library.
Yeah, so
If they're-
what their guidelines are, and how.
And they might not always get them. It depends on staffing at the jurisdictional level. It depends on, I know at times there's been like institutional knowledge loss where it's like somebody in the budget office didn't know.
Not that they were supposed to give the library one, yeah.
So then that comes into, if the library will collect it, do we have to proactively go to the jurisdiction and ask for these things if they're not already provided? Or are we just accepting whatever they provide?
To me, what it says right now is we make efforts to proactively
Yeah.
select these.
Well, publication, so they have to publish them. Like the entity has to make a physical copy of it that's ready for distribution, and a lot of their documents now are not that way. They're just links.
It does say provide access electronically, but I think that may have been from before there was an internet, like a free web, right? It may have been carried over from what we would have to get a CD-ROM or something.
But we still do that. Like if somebody came in here today and said, I want to read X document, which is not available, the
We
staff
would
would say,
help
let me
find it.
help you get on a computer
Yeah.
and here we'll pull it up for you.
Yeah.
So,
In which case, our collection efforts would be making sure staff are aware of where to find local government information.
I think, right, so there's a potential to get really in the weeds with this
Right.
one. So we want
Yeah.
some general statement saying we support local government documents. And
Yeah.
then,
Yeah, I
But we're
like
not
the
the government's
provide access electronically. That's just what you're saying. You, as
Point them to the link.
library staff or will help somebody find it.
Yeah,
I
I think
don't need to.
jurisdictions access electronically is much more now than it.
To me, David, a publication, she's saying they're online.
Right.
So to me, the supervisor meeting minutes, when they push it out to their website, they've published it, as far as I'm concerned, because everyone has a way to go look at it now.
so does this put the responsibility on the library to develop like a web portal for all those things? They already have their own.
I think this is from a time when they
Access.
just, and so
Right.
do we need to still?
My comment is speaking to, if we're using this word publication, what does it mean? But agreed,
To me, I think about print publications, like they have to go, I know that the city and the county, the budget offices they have to go through an effort to get something printed physically in order to get it to the library.
so I guess my feedback is if that's what we want it to mean, which
Should we say
would-
print
it would need to
publications?
Say print, because, but at the same time, I like the idea of I'm coming in to the library and I would like help finding something that was published in the minutes, and can you help me do that? So, yeah, there's,
I would just leave
agreeing
it.
that there's some operational cans of worms.
It's probably fine, but
Because of that last sentence, I think is a good one.
to me,
And or provide.
your last point there, Mike, we're getting a little outside the scope of material selection, but I think what the board is trying to communicate to the public, it's worth kind of saying, oh, and by the way, you know, it's not necessarily a material selection thing that the reference librarians will help you find this. That's some other policy. Okay.
All right, well, this requires some more thought. I mean, do we want to include it or not? But, and then what does it mean?
As the library serves the public embracing a wide range of ages, educational backgrounds, and reading abilities, it will always seek to select materials of varying complexity. What does that mean?
I think we want to say reading levels.
Yeah.
Is that what this is about?
How I interpret it.
I'm trying to think of something that they were specifically responding to. Other than what we've already said, which is,
I always thought it was more substantive complexity.
I thought it had to do with adult learners and literacy materials,
Ages, educational backgrounds, and reading abilities.
reading ability. So I thought it had to do with reading.
yeah, complexity is the tricky word there, I think.
What is this basically saying? We're gonna get children's materials and we're gonna get grown-up
That's
materials?
What
Possibly, yes.
And we also have adult materials on a lower reading level for adults that,
Yeah, does that need to be spelled?
Or is
Or-
it necessary?
I think you might address this by, wordsmithing out, just something like the library will select materials that address a wide range of ages, educational backgrounds and reading abilities, and just say we want to make sure we're serving all of these patrons that, that fit all those various characteristics.
I agree. If you just sort of swap it around, seeing for selecting materials to embrace those three things.
Martha's got a comment there.
Right, so we talked about.
We're talking about other languages as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
To a certain extent, we don't go over it. Can't,
I mean, that's like
languages.
relevant to community needs, right? Like
Yeah.
some
Yeah.
criteria, so do we need? Okay.
I think that's a good point. Should we address somewhere in here, developing?
Because that's changed, this
Yeah.
community's changed a lot. in the
Well,
last
it's
10 years.
we can't get the materials for some of them.
I think those are addressed in relevance to communities and interest availability, readability, readable by our population. And public demand and availability.
Well, to your
So-
point, Krista, we've had
Yeah, I mean-
large segments of population come
yeah.
in to the IRC where there's no.
To get the materials from in an affordable manner, at least, yeah.
We've seen Sharon Stone, who runs the free book bus, prints her own things in languages
Yeah.
for the IRC communities. She makes books for them, basically, and that are not available to buy.
But I think we should address that we're making an effort to. We're considering it. I guess shows up relevance to community need.
Good question.
We don't specifically address language anywhere.
I don't think it is that I'm familiar with. So maybe something in the criteria here.
I think it's useful, definitely useful for patrons from different jurisdictions. The question kind of comes to my mind. If we want to make sure we're addressing non-English speakers, then it's what percentage of resources? At some point, there's allocation is happening. If our community is 10% Spanish primary speakers, does that mean that we need to figure that out and identify it and provide 10% of the collection is in the Spanish language? I don't know the answer. I'm not proposing an answer, but it comes to my mind because we are at some level spending our jurisdictional resources in allocating them in certain ways.
I think for the board level document, it would just say, staff needs to try to make materials available.
You could, but then there's a wide range of what the staff might end up doing. And, I guess at some point, if the board doesn't like it, they can get back involved.
Say something here about the spirit of including those be good, and then the coming down to percentages and procedures would be more in a staff document, like
I would think
collection
so.
management plan. I believe does have a section on foreign languages.
Okay.
Yeah, and we even have the branch collection management plans, which could deal with, in certain areas, there might be a higher Latino population than other
Yeah.
areas. And same way with
It's gonna
Afghani
shift.
population in the city of Charlottesville is very different than it is in Nelson County.
Okay. And we had talked about moving number 1 to somewhere around here. Number 5, library materials will not be marked or identified to show approval or disapproval of the contents. No item will be sequestered except for the express purpose of protecting it from injury or theft. Use of rare and scarce items of great value may be controlled only to the extent required to preserve them from harm. Do we have any materials of rare and scarce? value?
I mean,
Can we change injury to damage?
That's not our thing though, like, that's not.
We do have the question of, there are certain, like $100 book. We have a book that costs $100 more than another book, and we put it into circulation. The question is, some libraries would put it only in reference where you can't take it home with you, but you can see it in the library. We sometimes choose to put that into circulation because it makes more sense for people to use it at home. And I believe that might be what this is addressing.
We also have
that
magazines.
If we couldn't replace that very valuable book, we would choose to restrict it to.
I feel like that's
library use
covered in the
only.
first sentence. It
I'm
won't
not
be-
sure what the second sentence says, the first sentence doesn't.
Right, except for the express purpose of protecting it from injury or theft.
Yeah.
Like, that's enough to say, okay, well, we're gonna keep this $500 book.
And yeah, the only other thing would be, so sequestered versus the use. You
I think we
could,
lose the sentence.
sequestering to me says we're not gonna put it, we're not gonna create a physical barrier to accessing it. Using the use of it would be my saying who can use it. I mean, I don't know whether those are two different things or not.
I can tell you right now, there are newspapers and magazines that are sequestered because they are stolen if they aren't sequestered.
Exactly, so we want that possibility because we need to preserve things.
High
for the
demand, yeah,
community.
So sequestered in the library world means not in circulation.
you have to ask the staff to use it.
But it stays in the library.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's just-
Or
there's a little
It
bit of a
doesn't go
barrier to
home.
getting it.
It doesn't go home.
it's just not freely open on the shelves. There are certain things. I'm trying
And it changes over time. Sometimes one thing starts to disappear.
depending on what's.
Consumer Reports or Value Line or,
Well, I think, to Mike's point, that we don't want to get too into the wordsmithing here. So there's value in the concept here, right? In number 5. Whether or not that thing about the rare materials needs to be there.
Right.
Maybe, maybe we shouldn't box in the library.
does
Maybe
this
in-
cover the
in
ACHS
future.
collection also?
It's a good question, yeah,
Some of
there
the
might,
materials are our materials.
yes, but not all of them.
Which,
We,
The
the,
Historical Society.
Charles was.
So there could be scarce and rare items there. And then I just don't like the word image or injury. I wanted to say damage. Because books aren't injured.
Yeah.
They're not people. Damage,
We do sometimes the book.
damage or harm. Yeah, we use harm there, yeah.
One thing that this is pointing out to me is there are some, I hadn't thought of the reference section. Apparently there are some materials that circulate and others that do not. And that isn't really conveyed anywhere here. On the other hand, we've selected those
Procedural.
materials. Yeah.
Sequestered means.
These materials are like an encyclopedia. Well, we also circulate encyclopedias. They are traditionally, first of all, print reference materials are
Waning.
waning. Thank you. That's word for it. Because most of this information is on, but we're coming from a time when we would always have a dictionary. We would also circulate dictionaries, but we would always have at least one here.
Doesn't go out.
And that's a reference dictionary. You can walk up and use it, but you can't take it home because we have to have at least one here.
Yeah.
Because people need a dictionary in the library. That kind of thing. So that would be the distinction between reference and circulating is things we want to have on hand.
I thought of a rare one.
Traditionally, yeah. But then also certain things that were pricey and hard to replace.
Hard to replace is my big one, like the local history things that I have in my reference.
Foreign Land, the Nelson.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
That's now a rare book.
Yes, rare book, and it's a book about Hurricane Camille going through there, made by the community. The proceeds from the sale of that went to building the library. There's a very rare book that we do keep a copy of at the library that would not be circulating.
There are other local history documents that are hard to replace simply because
There aren't other copies.
There aren't others.
they were produced once.
But we are not an archival institution.
That's
It's
correct.
not our job to hold those materials for the community. we're more of a popular lending library, but we do have some of those.
So then we should keep that.
Yeah, I think it would be fine to keep it.
Maybe make a note of this concept of archival versus lending.
I think that would be maybe good we talk about that as a staff periodically, you know, that we can't be, you know, because we have to weed materials and make room for new materials. And like, it's not JMRL's job to have every copy of everything that ever existed for the community. It's to meet the needs of our community as set out there. So that might be worth spelling out in one way or another here.
Yeah.
I don't know how to say that appropriately, but worth thinking about. I will assign myself that one.
I have a related topic that this brings to my mind. Although I don't know how much time we have. Usually we've been going about an hour and 15. We're getting near to that, so.
I think the agenda said we were done at 3. But could we push out?
I'm not seeing anybody put their laptops together. You want to aim for no later than 3:30? Is that okay with everyone here schedules?
Let me check to make sure we have the. But go ahead, Mike.
So a couple of years ago, there was a CE and also, I believe it was also presented an in-service about some problematic materials and JMRL's solution for those. They were children, there was a Babar children's books. And then nationally later, there was similar discussion about some Dr. Seuss books, and I don't know what JMRL did with that. But the JMRL solution that was presented in the CE was we're having these materials in the library, but we're going to shelve them or categorize them in one area of the library rather than another area of the library. So where in our broad corpus of policies and procedures is the idea of categorizing or shelving materials covered? And should it be touched on in any way in material selection? Or should that be somewhere else? I mean, I do think it's probably relevant and of interest to the community to kind of understand, because we're pretty prominent. This is the teen area, and we had talked about that we market that, and we talked about how to, you know, convey that we wanted certain age groups to be able to use that at various times. I forget how that exactly landed, but we clearly have a concept of categories within our system. So how does that intersect with this policy?
That's different from material selection. It's a different concept.
This
think we're-
policy talks about, can we have the book in the library collection? And then it's up to professional library staff to decide how to organize the collection for the most useful access.
I'm trying to think of
I'm not sure where that.
another
where that
policy that
goes.
would touch on that. I can't think of
Yeah.
one.
Does it say something in the reconsideration policy about you can, like the patron can request that it be put in another section versus removed from the collection?
Frequently, that is what the reconsiderations
Yeah.
are. I'm not sure. We'd have to.
So the interesting thing is, to me, reconsideration, and you could pull it up, points back to material selection.
Mm.
So if that's a possible solution, what's the basis for that solution? Where is that, you know, written down or offered to the public patron?
Maybe the procedure.
We don't have to answer this today. but
No, but I'm thinking about, is this the appropriate place to address this, or is there some other place to address it?
I believe the collection management plan does talk about who's responsible for organizing the collection versus the catalogers who do the original classification. And then the branches decide where in their physical space makes sense to put things. So it is addressed there, I believe, in terms of which
I
staff.
mean, one branch might put Babar in the children's section, and a different branch might put Babar in the where
I
they landed it.
can think of one title that's, I mean, we have several titles that are in YA and adult, or children, Tolkien is in, like the Lord of the Rings is in J and YA and adult, depending on who's asking for it.
My question was more about consistency within the
They get
system.
shelved based on the classification they get.
Yeah.
So based on,
Consistent.
yeah, it should be, so assume, 500,000 items, sure, there's, but like if the classification says this is gonna be a juvenile thing, it should be in the juvenile collection, so, or, I don't know what happened with Babar.
I think Babar ended up in the adult collection.
One or two Babar titles.
Right.
Not all,
Yes.
the ones that were, and the decision there was, the library is retaining this because it's an example of classical children's literature. And as such, it went into the literature section because that's the idea of we're retaining it because of its value as classical literature. The other Babar, newer Babar, are retained in the children's section because they are wanted by children.
What's the
audiences.
call number for the ones that are,
They're in the
is
800s.
it J800 or is it? 800?
No, if it's in the adult section, it doesn't have a J on
So
it.
they got reclassified.
Yeah.
as This is for,
And they're adult nonfiction.
An adult might seek it to see the difference, to see, as for historical perspective.
Exactly.
We don't have to solve this today,
Yeah.
but especially if we're saying that's a reconsideration path, then I think some clarity about how that decision is made. I think someone for the public.
And there was that other, there was the
Reconsideration
board book that was like a format issue. It had been classified as a board book, but really it belonged in the nonfiction juvenile collection. So that one was moved there after that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that wasn't changing age groups, but it was changing locations within the
Yeah.
area.
okay, so if I were to make a note to summarize what we just discussed and try to figure out where it would go, I'm not even sure that this is the right.
No, it's sort of generally reminded me of that question, but it's not the.
Policy on cataloging.
Right, there's no.
Or just make a new-
Policy on the organization of the library collection. That's.
This is the policy.
This is my collection management plan, which includes other technical services.
My reason for maybe not agreeing 100% with that is the public cares in some cases where stuff lives. And if we're saying, well, that's just up to the librarians and that there's a disconnect there. So to me, if the public cares, we should point back to, well, we hear you and we're following these criteria. And we told you in advance what those are and you could come to the meeting and help us shape those and so forth. But if we're just saying on the specific topic of shelving or categorization, if there's no such criteria anywhere that the public can see, then that's kind of a disconnect for me. The only thing I see here is public interest or needs of the public. It's very broad. What feedback is. We discussed both in the CE and a little bit today what needs of the public means in terms of material selection. What do we include? And now I'm saying, based on our past actions with this example from the problematic material CE, we also make decisions in the reconsideration policy about categorization. We don't have, I think, needs of the public isn't, or if we just say this and if we agree that covers it, classification is also handled by needs of the public, then at least we've spoken to it. But right now there's it's, as far as I understand, not spoken to in any way. Again, I just started this today, so maybe we can make a note, chew on it, and next meeting thoughts will.
Where does that note best belong? Just thrown on the side here?
Put it on one of these bullets, A, should we talk about classification?
Well, it would be
Some
under
would-
6.
Yeah, it would be a different bullet point. I agree, it's not the same bullet point.
So maybe even that, actually maybe 7 is the place for it.
Yeah. Just say it should be.
That could address, well, let's do 6 then 7. Responsibility for reading, listening, and viewing of library materials by children rests with their parents or legal guardians. Selection will not be inhibited by the possibility that materials may inadvertently come into the possession of children.
That really reflects this, American Library Association policy. Which we've accepted as a guideline.
Selection of materials for the Jefferson Madison Regional Library is the responsibility of the collections manager. Here we can get a little bit more bullet pointed about.
Happy taking that. I think just going back to this, if we added to this, then saying the organization of materials is the responsibility of whom? It's the professional librarians. And our professional standards are set through, we all have degrees for. The policy is material selection policy. So in my mind is, can I put this in the collection or not? We are getting into then where in the collection is, it's more management than selection. So we can do that, but it's.
I definitely agree that that's the defensible scope, is to say this is just what's in the library.
We don't have another place to put it. I understand
We
that.
are talking about, well, some things are circulating and non-circulating. In this conversation, we've been talking about bullet 5, which goes further than what's in the library and what's not. It's the
Yeah,
child
and that gets
property,
into
providing access.
barriers to access, right? Restriction of materials. So, yeah.
Yes, my question about number 7 is whether or not we want to get more in the weeds about specifically who else is in charge of, selecting for the teen collection, for the adult nonfiction.
Right. I'm not the only person who makes the
Right.
decision, although I take second responsibility for every final decision.
Okay.
By policy, I do.
But I do think this is the place.
Deputy.
Okay, so I think that's fine as is. If there's going to be a discussion about other things, whether it's classification, placement of materials, like potentially this would be a place to address, like
Yeah.
letting the public know, like, here's how it's done, or here's where you can find more information about that without this policy necessarily having to.
Right. And it could be principles for organizing the collection are laid out in the collection management plan.
Yes, that could be.
There must be
That's.
guidelines.
And that is,
Yeah.
it's an available document, we've given that to people in the past that have gone through the reconsideration process, like here's the plan that's being used. Also up for review after this policy is done, right?
Yes.
So
What is that? Is up for review?
the collection management plan,
Oh, that's not a procedural doc? Oh,
Yeah, that's
oh,
not
okay,
a
it's
procedural
up
document.
for review by the.
well, it's due to be reviewed, but there's no point in reviewing it until this is
Sure,
done
sure.
to make sure there's nothing.
So we can align the language. Oh dear.
Is that over?
Ghost in the machine today. Martha, can you still hear us? Also, Martha had a question about some, okay, great. Humble Books or International Digital Library, saying that those both are multilingual.
The current status.
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think we currently.
That was provided by the state for a while, and then we had it was free for a while during pandemic, and then it came back, and then it went away. I'd have to check with the children's folks on Tumble Books.
No results. Website. No
I had a note
reference.
saying we wanted to talk about the platforms and the.
You did. I think you did up at the top.
So Mike, this might be a good place to put a pin in it.
Yeah. That's good.
And don't we have a million gifts policies? Not a million, we have two.
They
Gifts of original art,
Yeah, that's, I wondered
and then
why
we have
this is
gifts.
here.
These are specifically gifts to add to the collection.
Oh, yes,
Like, here's this book, can you,
And then
I want it to be on the shelf for other people to check out.
yes, which is
All right,
different
that
from
makes sense.
someone giving us a painting.
Right, or here's $100 or.
But do you take CDs and DVDs and?
Yes.
Because some of these really it's saying, we thank you, but no thank you.
Well, it's
All of
clear.
ours are at the discretion of what we can use.
VHS tapes.
Yeah.
No VHS.
Yeah, generally we would tell the person, like, if you're gonna give this to us, we will consider it to be added to the collection. If it's not, it's gonna go to the library for a sale, so the person has to agree to that, basically.
Yeah, and that's,
Functionally, to me, this means, purpose of this is, hey, I've got this book, this great book that I think is great, and I want you to put it in your collection. I'm giving it to you free, so you,
Or I wrote this book here.
for whatever reason. And I think we want to inform people that we're not obligated to do that, and it's,
Yeah.
we're gonna either put that in our collection or not, based on these same criteria. So I think that is worth mentioning. Now, is this longer than we need to convey that? I don't know. But anyways, we'll, like, as you suggested, David, let's pick up here next time, and maybe we've both individually make some progress on some of these questions that we've raised, or topics we've raised.
I would think, one last thing on this section we're not talking about yet, like, some of this collection is the plan, rather, some of this is very procedural.
yes, yeah, and that is one of the things that needs to be updated, which is the local history collections in collaboration with the local.
And also, I do want to make sure that we keep the local voices here, so even if it doesn't 100% live here, this is a place people might go to see, and that is something where somebody says, I wrote this book, I want you to have it.
Because we do have
take them all.
different standards for inclusion of folks who live in our community and have written a book than somebody.
Right,
That's the book.
So Mike, is your assumption that we will resume, that this was a one-off meeting because of the scheduling for the board members, basically, that
Yes, yeah, so the next meeting would be
in
in
the October?
or October, yeah.
So that
Any
means,
reason to do it differently.
well, there's only 2 more before the end of the year, but we've only got 2 policies left, so this one and the bookmobile.
And if we blow over a little, that might be okay. But I think this is good progress, and my goal today was to get things on the table for discussion. We didn't really do bullet points from scratch, but we've also don't feel like, we surveyed the literature to see if there were other bullet points we needed to make. So, okay.
But the retention of those gifts, do you keep that stuff forever?
And that's covered
And
under
that last point was weeding.
Yeah.
the weeding withdrawals.
And remind me, where is weeding described for the public? There's not a weeding, oh, I see it there's a
Yeah,
few levels.
withdrawals, discards.
Uses weeding as a collection development tool.
Yeah, okay.
There's three paragraphs at the end there.
I'm kind of thinking a link to collection management plan might be appropriate here,
Absolutely.
somewhere here.
Yeah,
Okay,
I mean, we've done that in the past with other, like, I can't remember if it's a handbook or some,
Room guidelines or something.
yeah, meeting room guidelines, work
Yeah.
procedures, but they're publicly available.
all right, thank you, everyone. Please think about what we've discussed. This document is open for suggestions or edits. And we'll kind of reconvene, next time.
Thank you, Martha.